Seahawks fans, wherever you may be, welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alpstead, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alpstead, here with Keith Myers, as usual, and a special guest today, Viens from the Emerald City Sportscast is joining us once again, a friend of the show. Happy to have both of you guys here, and we're going to talk Seahawks football, going to talk the NFL draft, what the Seahawks did, maybe look around the NFC a little bit, and kind of check in with the roster and see if we're done yet. So how you guys doing? Dan, welcome in.
Always good to be with you guys. This will probably be our shortest show in our history, I think, because there's only 3 picks. But I'm looking forward to digging into this.
Oh, you're in for a surprise.
Yeah. Anytime. Bill and I always say that we're like, wow, this could be a short show. Like maybe, and then it ends up being like over an hour and a half. And we're like, wow, that was not nearly short. So
we'll do our best, Dan, I promise. We always try to do our best. And, sometimes it works. Sometimes
I don't have anywhere else to be or anywhere else I'd rather be.
So Keith, talk to me. You said before we started recording that you ended up having kind of a tiring weekend and you were pretty tired today. So,
well, yeah, I mean, we ran into the fact that our furnace caught on fire. Not this weekend, but the previous weekend, and we're just kind of dealing with the fallout from that, and getting stuff cleaned up and getting people in here to give us bids to. Well, we can't fix it because it literally burnt. So, but to replace it and all of that. So it's been stressful and everything, but you know what is great for when I'm having stressful weeks, getting a chance to sit here and talk Seahawk football with you, Bill. So let's do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Isn't real life great?
Well, with 3 of us sitting here, we'll have plenty to talk about, all sorts of different prospects and so forth. First, I want to mention just a little bit of team strategy type stuff. Pete Carroll had a kind of news conferences throughout the weekend and mentioned that Gabe Jackson will be moving over to right guard while Damian Lewis moves over to left guard. Just kind of want to get a quick take on that from you, Dan. Kind of, what are your thoughts around their strategy with the offensive line this year, especially after the Russell Wilson kind of thing?
Yeah, that one caught me by surprise. And I was watching that press conference live. I always like those pre-draft press conferences to try and pick up on little clues or hints, and with only 3 picks this year, there weren't as many clues or as many hints, but that was kind of a bombshell that was just sort of snuck in there. I was a little bit surprised. I thought they would keep Damian Lewis where he was because he's young, just going into his 2nd year in the league, give him a chance to have that continuity and make that leap. But looking at it, since he made that comment, I understand it. Gabe Jackson's been there, I think, 6 seasons now. As a veteran, and maybe they think Lewis being kind of younger and a little more raw, it's not too soon to move him over there.
Yeah.
But I also kind of think of it this way. I was talking to one of my buddies last night that kind of like you and Keith, that we talk about this stuff all the time, 24/7, 12 months a year. I like the pairs, how it sets up. We were kind of excited before about Gabe Jackson next to Dwayne Brown, the 2 grizzled vets, really outstanding guys on one side. But I kind of like the pairing now where you have Jackson, the vet, next to a guy who played well last year in Shell, but who's younger and maybe has some deficiencies in his game. And then likewise on the other side, Lewis, the guy who's still pretty young and still learning the game next to Brown. I kind of like how that works. So, caught me by surprise, but I don't really think it changes how I feel about the line as a whole.
Yeah, for me, I actually kind of liked it because for that reason. I mean, you put Jackson where he's been a Pro Bowler and you leave him there instead of making him move and then still expecting him to play at that level. And you put Lewis next to a Pro Bowler in Dwayne Brown. And so that the communication is going to be on point. And if there's anything to be learned from the guy next to you, you're learning from the right guy if you're right next to Brown. So I think it's a good fit overall for Seattle's talent.
Yeah, instead of taking your two best pass protectors, which would be Jackson and Brown, and putting them on the same side, you're kind of, even though Lewis and Shell both do pretty well in that area, you're kind of spreading that out a little bit. I can see what they're trying to do.
Yeah, and then they left Posick alone, and they didn't draft really a guy to kind of compete with him there. So it'll be interesting. I mean, they brought in a couple of undrafted guys that might be able to compete a little bit, and I do know that they like Kyle. And it's
Kyle
just
Fuller. Yeah,
Kyle Fuller, and it's just going to have to be. It is what it is. I mean, it's not going to be any worse than it was last year in that position, as long as he stays healthy.
Yeah.
I think it'll be fine, especially since he's surrounded by really two good quality players. So,
well, they obviously feel like it's going to be fine, because as I was following that night of the draft, I was just shocked at how guys were falling to us. Even Landon Dickerson went later than we expected. And the fact that Creed Humphrey was there, and I kept saying, I think I even tweeted it, if Creed Humphrey's there, you stay at 56, you take him and you just call it a day.
Yeah. Well, Creed Humphrey was Keith's pick in our mock draft. And
on our mock draft show,
I was shocked that
seemed
he
to be
was
a
there
perfect
for him.
fit.
And I was like, wow, he's normally going in the 40s with all the composite big boards, everything that I'm looking at. And then he falls a little bit. He's there. It's like, well, that's the obvious choice, right? Because you're going to have cornerback available at 129 at worst. And at best, maybe you can move up a little bit and grab one of those two guys that you kind of really like.
Yeah.
And it just kind of fell in a completely different direction. So let's talk about it. I mean, obviously, I think the Seahawks had the right position groups to emphasize, not only in the draft, but after the draft in undrafted free agents that they picked up, wide receiver, cornerback, and interior offensive line. I think or offensive line in general were all positions of need that we all kind of established. And then there were other, secondary needs and so forth. But, right at the very top, they select a guy that I was extremely excited about right after the Senior Bowl. It's like, I really hadn't paid attention to Dwayne Eskridge, who they selected at number 56 overall. They didn't drop back, but he was a guy out of that Senior Bowl. I was like, wow, that's a guy to pay attention to. He would really be a good fit for the Seahawks as far as being able to move in that Shane Waldron offense, to be able to get into open space. And once he's out there, he could be a threat to go the distance every time he touches the ball. I mean, a guy like that is really awesome. And then after a while, he kind of became an afterthought as we moved around and talked about a whole bunch of different prospects and so forth. But what are your thoughts, Keith, first on the Dwayne Eskridge pick and the strategy the Seahawks elected to have in keeping that spot and making that selection?
Well, I mean, you're going to keep that spot. I mean, that was one of the things that was said. I don't remember who it was, but one of the plugged in things was like, don't be surprised if the Seahawks just sit and only take three players. And ranks, from Seattle. And so he knows the team, he knows some people with them. And for him to be like, don't be surprised if John Snyder doesn't do John Snyder things and move all over the place, was interesting. And then that's what they did. Taking a wide receiver, though, I thought, given that the offensive lineman fell, given the need at cornerback, I was really surprised at this pick. I also am not completely, excited about the player, given that he's 5'9". I mean, he's a really hardworking guy who loves playing on special teams. So, you're going to get that out of him, and not just as a returner, but as like a guy who can, get downfield and make plays on punt and kick coverage, and isn't afraid to come off the edge and try and block a kick, and the field goal team. But, we're talking about a guy who's 5'9", and he's got the speed to take the top off of defense, but he's not going up and winning, those 50-50 balls. He's not big enough. So I was pretty surprised that this was the guy that they stuck at 56 for.
Yeah, Dan, are you surprised that this is the player, or that it was the spot?
Not the spot, surprised at the player. I even started as the draft got closer. I talked a little bit about it last week on my show with Chris Clough, I tweeted it. The closer the draft got, as I was trying to ask myself, like, what would the Seahawks do to surprise me, because they always do. Receiver was the thing I kept coming back to. Mm-hmm. That while the consensus seemed to be, and I think we even talked about it the last time we were on here, that wide receiver 3 wasn't as big a need as some people tended to think it was. I just always go back to Pete Carroll's first press conference, the very first one, when he spelled out his philosophy. And a lot of attention gets paid to the fact that he talked in that press conference about how they wanted to run the football, and he stuck to that. But he talked about loving guys that can score touchdowns too. Yeah. And that's been in his history too.
And tilt the field.
Yeah. And it didn't surprise me they went receiver, but I didn't really study Eskridge. I was aware of him because you said after the Senior Bowl you loved him. Well, so did Daniel Jeremiah. There was so much buzz coming out of the Senior Bowl on how he performed against some good corners.
Yeah. I heard Nagy interviewed afterwards and said he was like one of his 2 players that he felt like if you needed to walk away with only 2 players out of the draft, he was one of them.
He went a little farther than that. He said that, to his knowledge, him and Trey Brown, who we'll talk about in a little bit, were 2 guys that Schneider felt like he had to have.
Yeah, well, that's
in this draft. And even though we know now that Schneider said he did have a deal to move down from 56 that fell through, you can see why you wanted to stay at 56, because some of those smaller receivers, that playmaker types that you can do different things with, gadget players, if you will, kind of went right after us. Tutu Atwell went to the Rams right after a similar type player. Mm-hmm. And so, as good as Schneider
about that
is.
Philosophy as far as going for that type of wide receiver, as opposed to something that Keith and I spent a lot of time talking about on the show, which was a larger possession style wide receiver, similar to the kid out of Eastern Washington,
Cooper Kupp, who he
and even Tamarian Terry, the kid from Florida State that we signed in undrafted. I totally agree with you. I think it speaks to how we can have our impressions of what the team needs, and I was the same way. I looked at outside guys because I thought we had enough of those inside guys. I thought Penny Hart could be interesting. We're still waiting for John Ursua to break. Aaron Fuller is that type of player, but it just goes to prove that we never know what they're thinking. And what this pick tells me, and specifically the type of player and how they talked openly about planning to use him, and it goes with something else that I got out of that pre-draft press conference, is that I think this is a Shane Waldron pick. I think that the way Carroll spoke about him in such reverent terms on Wednesday before the draft, in a way we've never heard him speak about a coordinator, is this was a guy that Waldron felt like he needed to really diversify that offense. And that's what it screamed to me.
Right. Well, when you listen to that thing, he talked about the need for Shane to have 3 legitimate threats. And he talked about Gerald Everett being part of that mix. But obviously they felt like they needed to add, one more little element. They went up high, relatively high in the draft, 56 overall, to get the guy that they really wanted, as opposed to dropping back and maybe having a few different selections, a few different position groups available later, maybe out of a pick. It was more important to go after the guy that they wanted. Keith, what did you think about their next move? So they did that, and then there's a bunch of waiting, and now that they're really kind of looking at interior offensive line, cornerback, maybe a strong side linebacker type or edge guy that could fill that role. So what did you think about the Trey Brown deal?
See, I like the pick that in terms of going and getting a cornerback, but I know that they were saying that that Trey Brown was one of the guys that Schneider felt that he had to have. I don't get it. I straight up don't get any obsession with Trey Brown whatsoever. I don't think he would have been on my draft board, just straight up.
Well, we certainly didn't talk about the prospect very much because it just didn't fit the profile that we were thinking that they would be looking at.
Yeah, it isn't a guy that they that they would have looked at. And I mean, he's
5'9" and 3/4, 190 pounds.
He's short. He's got short arms.
He's got less than 30-inch arms.
And
almost 28. in some arms.
And he holds on every single play.
Yeah. So
he's a penalty machine.
The cool thing is he's got speed. You know, he does have some speed, and he's got some agility. Is he the prospect though that you wanted to pull out of the draft in that range? You know, there were a few other guys available.
There was a ton of guys
better.
Yeah, I don't get it. I've asked on Twitter. I'm like, somebody explain this to me because I don't get it. I don't understand it.
To me,
I'm like, I just straight up, someone needs to describe to me the philosophy for this, and no one has been able to. The best explanation is that the Seahawks didn't have enough guys named Trey on the roster, and there's like this unspoken rule you have to have two. But other than that, no, I can't define the pick. I can't explain it.
I think it was the Senior Bowl. I honestly believe that it was the Senior Bowl. They've got such a good relationship with Nagy that they had some guys there, obviously, and the fact that their top two picks came from that Senior Bowl, and they spoke about them, with Nagy before the draft. It just kind of reiterates to me this whole challenge with identifying prospects, finding the right kind of guys that you like, not only in terms of the physical attributes and all that kind of stuff, but the guys that are in it, mentally and all that stuff. It's a real challenge when you can't meet in person and so forth. And so I think they were, I don't know. I mean, I think that they were listening to some folks, from the Senior Bowl that gave them some really good insight into the players that really kind of fit into what Seattle really likes as far as the type of mental aspect of the game. I think it maybe turned out to be a little bit more important this year than other years.
But did they not watch tape and watch him hold on every
maybe
play?
Maybe they appreciate that and figure they can school that a little bit, but you can't teach physicality, but you can adjust that a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah,
what do you think, Dan?
So I think you just touched on it a little bit, Bill. There's a couple of things that I take away from the Trey Brown pick. And again, I didn't study the guy pre-draft because despite Carroll's comments about DJ Reed changing his mindset, I thought, well, they'd still probably go for someone who met sort of their type. First of all, from a practical standpoint, most of the corners that I really did like were off the board at that point. And so if they went into this draft thinking we got to have a corner, but we wanted to go Eskridge first, then the board didn't really fall their way. Keith Taylor's really the only guy that I really liked that kind of went right after Brown in that range. But here's what I think the thinking might be. First of all, I think the Seahawks have a tremendous amount of confidence at corner, maybe more so than any other position on the roster, in their ability to teach. And so the handsy stuff, I think that they feel like that they can teach him. But I think there's a part to Brown's game that appealed to them more than his height, his length. I think they're looking for guys more so on that defense now than they have in a while that just love the game of football and are tenacious and have an attack mentality. And you certainly see that in the way he plays. How well he did against some of the premier receivers that he went up against and bigger receivers. Pro Football Focus said he had the best passer rating against in the country, but especially he did really well against those guys. I think the other part of his game that I think makes a little bit of sense is when you look at the NFC West now, we don't have, AJ Green is broken down and was more of a deep threat anyway, not really a big. DeAndre Hopkins is a possession receiver, but he's still, the NFC West used to be full of big receivers you had to match up with. It's not anymore. It's guys like Deebo Samuel. It's guys like who'd the Cardinals just take, Rondale Moore. It's guys like Christian Kirk. It's guys like, even Woods and Kupp aren't real big, go up and get it kind of guys with the Rams. It's crossing routes. It's those systems. I think guys that can really run and stick to people might have a little more value now in their system, being able to match up in different ways than guys like Akilla Witherspoon or bringing a Richard Sherman back and keeping that long mentality. That's my thought. I think that's why they like the player.
I agree with that. And, to a certain extent, but they're still not a press man coverage team most of the time. And that kind of points to a little shift there. And so maybe we can talk about that. Like, is that a complete shift in the way that they want to run their back end? Or is that just this guy can do that and we're still going to run a lot of zone stuff?
It could be. It could also be an overreaction. This could be an overreaction to how well DJ Reed played. And, we'll see. Time will tell. They needed a corner out of this draft because they don't have any sign beyond next year. I loved listening to this kid's post-draft press conference. You can see the attributes and why they would fall in love with them. Just listening to him talk gets you pumped up and fired up, and I want to see him play. But the prospect of two corners that, like, if he were to be as good as they say he is and end up starting opposite DJ Reed, that's a little weird. I see him more as a guy that maybe can play matchup in certain packages.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's interesting because he's got the attributes that the Seahawks love: the agility, the aggressiveness, the movement, the stop and go ability, all that kind of stuff. And the things that kind of go against him, the handsy, the overly aggressive, they also love.
Shaq was similar to that. He was always a flag waiting to be thrown too. And
until they get the hang of it, I think that he could. I think guys can adjust. Especially if he's mentally in the game. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
I will say this. A lot of times when they take these guys that don't make a lot of sense, there's a lot of names 10, 15 spots behind them that kind of add into making me upset with the pick. And I don't know that there's a lot of opportunity cost here at that point of the draft, that there's any guys that just absolutely swung and missed on. We'll see how that works out.
It's a tough draft
because I love what they did after that in the draft. Absolutely love.
Yeah, their final pick, as much as I am just really annoyed at the Trey Brown pick, because like I said, to me, just his tape, just watching him hold on every play, they're like, yeah, he was the highest rated, whatever. Yeah, but every single one of those plays is a foul at the NFL level.
I think that's too harsh.
It's not it's go and watch him play.
I watched him video.
He holds, he's grabby,
like
he's not just, it's not physical. Actually. It's a penalty on every one. So it's
not because he thinks he can get beat. He's got 4.42 speed. It's that I think he needs to be coached up a little bit. And I think
he doesn't anticipate routes as well as he thinks he should. And so therefore
you could certainly say that. And that would of course be more difficult for him in a zone scheme. If he's, but, on the other hand, I've seen reports that say he does know how to diagnose pretty well, and he's quick minded and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting. But the kid is legit, I think. I didn't study him very much, but now that I have a little bit, the guy didn't allow a pass over 39 yards the past 2 seasons. He faced great competition, guys like Tylan Wallace and some other guys out of the SEC and so forth. So we'll see. I mean, you just never know. At the fourth round, at that level, guys either come in and make it, or they spend 3 years or 4 years on special teams, and they're gone. So
I also feel like the Seahawks feel really, really good as we sit here today in their pass rush, and they're confident that teams aren't going to have a lot of time to throw. And maybe a guy like this that's really aggressive at the top of routes is kind of what they were looking for, thinking we need guys that can make plays. We don't necessarily need to find that type of outside corner that can mirror a guy for 4 seconds.
Okay, Mr. Offensive Line, Keith Myers, why don't you announce this third
third pick? Okay, so as much as I really didn't get the Trey Brown pick, for them to recognize that Stone Forsythe, the offensive tackle out of Florida, dropped way further than he should have, know that he was worth whatever they needed to give up to go up and get him in the 6th round. They move up from 250 to get him, and which going up, they didn't go that far, so it didn't cost them that much.
Well, they traded down on the 3rd day, and early, and then they gave up the two picks that they had, 217 and 250 overall, to get to 206.
Yeah, and so going up and getting a guy, there is so much to like. I mean, just straight up, the guy's 6'8". He's super long. He mirrors extremely well. His
Seahawks
footwork
measured him at almost 6'9" too. By the way,
his footwork is great. One of the things that I really liked is that he wasn't sloppy in his technique. You look at his kick step against speed rushers, and he was committed to it, and he was committed to the technique and the fundamental of it. And that was why he was such a great pass blocker. I mean, I think he is one of the other than, the guys in the top of the first round, he's one of the best pass blockers you're going to find in this year's draft. And I can't believe he's available that low.
Zerline had him as the 11th overall lineman, center, guard, tackles in the draft.
It was hard
even
to
ahead
find
of Walker Little, who go ahead.
It was hard to find any rankings list that had him lower than the 4th round.
Yeah.
I mean, it was there was a consensus out there on this guy.
In my mock, I kind of worked out a scenario where I traded back a couple times and I drafted Walker Little with my first pick in the second round there. And my idea was, I know, we wanted a center or we wanted an interior lineman, a guard, in the draft. But if you look at Brown, he's got 1 year left, and who knows if he's going to re-up again. This would be the year that you want to hedge. However, we gave up our first round draft pick this year. We don't have a first round draft pick next year. You're going to have to get a guy that's going to be a little bit of a project, maybe stick him in there if you can, at guard this year or right tackle, and then transition him to left tackle next year. So I thought Walker Little would fit that profile. Well, they found a guy that's equally thought of in the football community to come in and be able to kind of do that. And so talk to me a little bit about the prospect itself and how you think he fits in. Does he fit in as more of a right tackle guy that's going to take over for Shell maybe this year or next, or is it more of a left tackle kind of a guy?
I see him as a left tackle. He's a blindside protector waiting to happen. What he isn't is a great run blocker. He's so tall. He has a hard time getting his pads low enough to really get leverage and really move people, 5 yards downfield. And that you tend to put players like that on the quarterback's blind side and expect the runs. You want a more powerful guy on the right side. And so to me, he's a left tackle. He's a guy that has the ceiling to be Dwayne Brown's eventual replacement in a year or two. That's where his ceiling is. His floor is also kind of low. Just he needs to increase some of his functional strength a little bit. And also, just he's got work to do as far as, some of those things, especially as a run blocker. He just struggles to get his pads low enough because he's so tall. But
at this level in the draft.
But it's in the 6th round, you get a guy that can protect Russell Wilson's blind side in the passing game. And especially because you look at what they did, Gabe Jackson is a pass blocking guard. And now they go get a tackle who is great in pass protection. They are looking at trying to protect Wilson. Clearly it's a thing that they care about suddenly. And
so I know a guy that you respect as far as an opinion and scouting and profiling and so forth. Tony Pauline believes that he projects to the right side just because he lacks the footwork off the edge, and he struggles to adjust and pick up blitzes, and he gets kind of exploited by speed rushers and so forth. So are there any concerns about that you see, or do you believe that those things can be worked out?
I mean, he's got quick enough feet. There are a few places where there's an extra step and that kind of stuff. But I think overall his footwork is decent. I think
he only allowed 2 sacks in like over 250 snaps or something like that in 2020.
And I think that he's a guy that I think I would project on the left. I know that Pauline projects him to be the right, but I don't think he's the run blocker that you want over there. Because if you look at in Seattle's system where they do a lot of inside zone, where they run to the right, and you want your right tackle, right guard combination to be able to get push to give your running back somewhere to go. And so I don't think I would put him there in Seattle's system. I'd leave him on the left side.
Dan, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think, all the analysis I read, and I was really, really late on Stone Forsythe, really kind of just uncovered him the last week of the draft and actually worked him into some mocks, and usually kind of in that 4th round area or after I'd moved down from there a little bit. every analyst, analysis that I can get my hands on, multiple of them said, as a pass blocker, he can start day one. Like, he's good enough to start in the NFL from day one. And that's a really encouraging thing. The other thing I would say, and I'm surprised that Pauline said that, although I think Tony has a very, very high standard for what he sees in a left tackle. And typically
to be fair, that was written in like January too. I mean, okay. I know it was early and based just probably off some tape, but didn't take into account any off-season work, any senior type stuff.
I think Tony's great. I think he's a little too quick to sometimes to say this guy's a guard or that guy goes to the right side. But then you see the tape and like Keith said, the first thing that jumped out at me, he's a former basketball player and you could see it, like his slide step. Like,
it's going to take 2.5 seconds to get around the guy anyway.
I always kind of clinch up and hesitate to watch rookie offensive line tape on the edge because I still am traumatized by Jermaine Ifedi tape with the like the dancing bear backpedal thing that he would do. And
it was so terrible.
It was so weird and bizarre.
So bad.
I can't believe he started for 4 years.
He was so bad.
But Forsyth is so clean and smooth. And the last point I'll make is that, two last points. One, they left him on an island in Florida. They never gave him help. He didn't get tight end help. He didn't get
running back help. He didn't get anything.
And they threw it 70% of the time. So of course he wasn't a very good run blocker, despite the physical reasons, because they never really worked on it with him, and it wasn't really part of their game. They left him there by himself against really good. A lot of guys just got drafted out of that conference, and over the last couple of years are in the NFL that are terrorizing quarterbacks. And he held his own against those guys. The last thing I'll say is this, and the Seahawks always seem to do this. There's always some area of the draft, some chunk where you could say, okay, what if you flip these two around? Stone Forsyth was supposed to go in the third or fourth round. If the Seahawks had taken him with their fourth round pick and Trey Brown in the sixth, I don't think anyone, would you even have a problem with that, Keith, if Trey Brown was their sixth round pick?
Maybe. Like I said, I don't think he would have been. I don't think he would have been on my draft. I don't think he would have been on my draft board. But if he was a sixth round pick, I don't think I'd care because it's a sixth round pick, and it's like you take flyers on guys, and you know what? He's got the speed. He's got a great attitude. He's coachable. All of that. Go for it. But.
Well, what kind of an impact?
I thought I could sell you on that one.
No, well, I mean, okay. So Bill brought up Pauline. Pauline had him as the 210th best player in the draft. Right. He had him as a 6th to 7th round pick.
So you're saying he was pegged. He got it.
Trey Brown?
Oh, I thought you were talking about Forsyth.
Forsyth was number 93. He was the top 100 player according to Pauline. Nice. He was 210 Trey Brown was 210.
Right.
I do wonder about this, and I actually got some information yesterday from a source I trust who has a connection. And the Seahawks apparently, and I believe this to be true, only had about 30 guys on their draft board. And I think, and Schneider's talked real openly about how they went to work right after the draft. They determined with all the challenges this year evaluating players and all the hurdles that they'd have to get over. You don't get to see guys in person, all that stuff, that they decided to trade picks for veterans. I think they were I think they put a lot of value this year, and ultimately maybe we'll find out too much on the type of guy that a player was, because they just didn't want to risk, with such limited draft capital and not a chance to get to know him. They just didn't want to risk drafting any guys that were going to be an issue. And all these guys they took, you can make questions about their games, but they all have that dog mentality, and they're guys that love football, and they're guys that aren't going to give you any problems in the locker room either.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to question any of these picks in terms of that. Like, as far as character, work ethic, all that kind of stuff, all three of these guys are guys you want on your team.
Yeah.
And with Eskridge, I think there's a lot to like there. He just wasn't a guy I was looking at, but I mean, I can see it. It makes sense. I mean, how much shorter is he than, Lockett? The answer is like a half an inch. So I don't, you know what I mean? And it's not like it's slowed Lockett down or anything. No. So I can whine about the pick all I want, but the truth is the kid can play and he's awesome.
Well, once you get on the field, it's,
and
you
with Forsyth, like seriously, I would have been okay if the Seahawks had taken him in fourth.
Yeah.
I would have been okay if they were at the fourth and they realized, wow, we need to go up into the bottom of the third to get him because he had dropped that far. And for him to get him in the sixth is like insane to me. But I am still just struggling to make sense of the Trey Brown pick. I just don't. I don't see what they like in him. I just don't see what they like in him. Other than
we're going to find out, though. I mean,
other than like his personality, his leadership, his all those intangible kind of things. I get that, but his tape, I see a guy that holds on every play. It's just he's the Jermaine Ifedi of cornerbacks. He just holds on every play.
So getting back to Dan's point on why they made the selections, what they were looking for, what they settled on, and so forth. I think it goes back to the NCAA's offer for seniors to have another year of eligibility, for juniors to have another year of eligibility. There was over 1,000 juniors and seniors that went back to college. Some of those, not all of them, but some of those would have been eligible, so that made the back end of the 6th and the 7th round, those values were kind of skewed this year as far as guys that maybe a lot of the times would have been undrafted priority guys that were now going to be draftable. And so it's hard. Nonetheless, I think we came away with what we could come away with. Would I have liked to have seen an extra pick or two thrown in there? Yeah, sure. But
for sure.
But at the same time, I think they did get the guys they wanted, and that's the most important thing to come away with the draft.
I think over time, this draft, ultimately, I'm going to be looking at a couple of things that I'll judge it on, let's say 2 years from now, is how good of a player, how productive of a player does Eskridge become compared to the centers that were taken right behind him, versus what kind of production they get out of Posick and whoever the other centers are over the next 2 years. That's one thing I'm going to be looking at. If Creed Humphrey goes on to be an all-pro and Dwayne Eskridge is a third wide receiver that comes up with a play or two here and there, that's a loss, right? But the other one will be the decision to go receiver in the second instead of corner, because that's where they lost out. Between the second and the fourth pick is where all those corners that we liked, that we really felt like would have matched, they all went there except for Taylor. And Taylor technically didn't meet, the Seahawks specs, but he was such a good cover. He was best cover guy at the Senior Bowl. So over time, also, if a couple of those corners become stars and we continue to struggle developing young guys over the next couple of years and have trouble at that position, this isn't a slam dunk draft by any means. They're all interesting players, but there's certainly going to be questions.
Yeah. Well, when you say all, there's 3 of them. I mean, that's the
all
tough part.
3.
I think this is, we came away with at least 8 picks under John Schneider's regime until this year. This was the lowest amount of picks that the Seahawks have ever had, as well as a league low for, a number of years. I think clear back to the New Orleans shipped their entire draft, for their running back.
For Ricky Williams.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, kudos to Schneider for, he'd said out loud after the first night that, like a lot of GMs around the league, he felt like those 2022 picks were gold because that draft is going to be so deep with all those guys with the SU. Yep. And I think I bet you it was hard for him to do that there were temptations along the way for him to trade 2022 picks to get some extra capital this year. I'm glad he didn't, because how weird is it that if you look ahead to next year's draft board, even without a first round pick, we have all the rest of our picks and an extra 4th. I mean, that seems like a bounty. Well, it is. It would be a bounty compared to what we just took, except for the first round pick. Yeah. Right. Even without one.
All right. So we only had a chance to talk about 3 picks out of the regular draft. Let's talk about some undrafted free agents that we like, and why. I think the first guy that comes to mind in the undrafted market that we were able to capitalize on is Tamorian Taylor, wide receiver out of FSU. Now, he's got all the talent. I mean, when you look at his tape, he looks like a first, second round kind of a guy, right? And then you figure out his entire backstory and what's going on and stuff. I think a lot of that is a little overblown as far as being his complete responsibility. It's just one of those things that happened with injury, timing. He did, I think, based on all those things, I think there was some frustration in him that kind of came out to his position coach in kind of a yelling match on the sideline and stuff. But again, you can take a look at that and say, yeah, there's some frustration there. It's also a passionate player that really believes, in something, and you can kind of mold that a little bit depending on his maturity level. You get him in, you kind of coach that up a little bit, and you take advantage of the physical attributes that he's got and see if you have anything there. What are your thoughts on this, Dan?
He looks like a Rams receiver to me when I see him on tape. He's had some issues with drops, but he's 6'3", and he runs so well after the catch, and that seems to be a theme.
He's explosive.
Yeah, and that's something I think, and we're going to talk about another receiver here too in a minute. But it's something that the Seahawks haven't done in a while. I think it was something that we all felt like was a real downfall of Schottenheimer's scheme. Bevel didn't really get into it either, where he puts receivers in a position to get the ball and have some yards after catch opportunities. That's what that Rams passing game is all about. And when I see Terry, I see and what he does with the ball after he catches it, a slightly taller Robert Woods. He's so fluid and really dynamic with the ball in his hands. He's got a real shot. We could see a complete overhaul of this wide receiver crew. I think Freddie Swain's probably safe.
But everyone else, yeah.
Yeah, everyone's going to have to earn a spot behind DK and Tyler for sure. But sometimes they keep 6 receivers, and we might have 3 rookies in that room.
Wow, that would be interesting. To have
three
rookies out of 6 guys. That's
what I base that on is if they liked Penny Hart, if they liked Darren Fuller, if they liked any of those other guys that they have, that we thought maybe could make a contribution, especially given the new scheme. I don't think they go receiver in the second. And I don't think they sign these high-end guys because Cade Johnson's another one.
I think they were looking for a clear upgrade, and there's an opportunity there. When you take a look at the Shane Waldron situation, he had like 4 or 5 guys that caught more than 40 passes in that offense.
Yeah.
And we needed a little bit of an upgrade there to get to that, at least the ability to make that happen in the way that Waldron envisions his offense being the most successful. And he's got Russell Wilson, right? So the difference is you're going from a guy that has a difficult time throwing past 20 yards to a guy that can stretch the field. So some of the things that came out of that press conference too, with Pete Carroll, was the fact that he's really excited about the way that they're blending the offense. They're taking, just like they did with Schottenheimer, from Bevel. They're going to take some of what works, and they're going to blend it in with Shane's stuff, and it's going to be kind of a hybrid thing. But one of those things is, they're still going to keep that long passing game, the stretching the field, the taking the shots, the explosive plays. They're still going to be extremely important in this offense, in addition to stretching the defense wide. I think this thing has a chance to be pretty special. And you get a guy like Tamarian Taylor, who's got all the physical skills that you would love to see in a prospect in the open field space. It goes along with Eskridge. And then again, you mentioned another receiver, another guy that they brought in out of North Dakota State, Cade Johnson, a guy with not as much speed, but a guy that's dynamic, knows how to run routes, with his size that's not terribly large. He's still a guy that knows how to use his body, his speed, his cuts and so forth to get open and create opportunities. To me, when I watched this, and I ended up watching like 45 minutes of tape on this guy because I couldn't stop. He just was like one big play away from another highlight. I mean, so I was pleased that at least he's getting a shot and we're giving him the shot. He may not make it, obviously. No. The mental aspect of this game is huge. And from all accounts, that's where he needs the most work. However, when you really take a look at the backstory and so forth, I think some of that is not necessarily should be attributed directly to him. I think there were circumstances around his situation there that made things difficult. And a lot of it had to do with the knee injury that he had, the timing of that, the opting out of the last couple games of the season, the issues with the coaching staff and all that stuff. It's hard to judge that from a distance.
Well, he's a classic case too of the quarterback play at Florida State the last couple of years hasn't been great.
That's being nice.
Yeah,
he's in 2019 he had 60 catches on 103 targets for almost 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns, and averaged almost 20 yards reception on those. So the guy's legit.
Yeah, he's going to be interesting.
We can talk about Cade Johnson. What do you think about Cade Johnson? He had kind of a draftable grade. Everyone kind of assumed that he would go anywhere between the fourth, maybe fifth to the 7th round. I think his pro day 40 hurt him in particular, as well as some lack of explosive traits, especially
it didn't have a great vertical
right. It was average. Everything was average. He ran a 4.51, I think 40, something like that. What are your thoughts on Cade Johnson, Keith, as far as a prospect that you think might be able to come in and carve out a spot? Or do you think he's a practice squad guy?
I think he's going to end up on the practice squad this year, and they give him a chance to develop. I think he's a guy that, it depends. He'll have to come out and really show that he is a better player than...
He's a first-team All-American in 2019.
Yeah, that's his production. That's not his talent.
He was very productive, though.
But that's the thing. There's a difference between production and talent, because it comes, there's lots of different factors that bring someone's production up and down. John Ursa was like the most productive wide receiver in college football history, and he has struggled to make the roster and stay there. And so the fact that his lack of physical traits gives me pause and thinking like, okay, he may struggle. But at the same time, physical traits aren't everything.
It's a tough deal, because a guy that's at North Dakota State can lack a few physical attributes, including the top end speed, and still be very successful in that division. And when you get to the NFL, it's a completely different game.
Yep. And so we'll see. The thing is, does he have short area quickness to get open like the Wes Welker kind? Probably not. But that's kind of where I would expect him to, if he's going to carve out a niche, that's where I'm expecting him to go. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. It's funny that you mentioned Welker and don't think that he looks like him, because when that's one of the names that came to mind when I watched his, when you watch his Senior Bowl one-on-one tape, he's just spinning guys around like the whole week. It was a lot of fun to watch, and he really made a name for himself that week. I think you touched on something. I think he's the perfect practice squad guy, because I do think there's some potential there to be a productive player. But because he doesn't have those elite traits, he's probably a guy that gets through waivers, on the final cut down and gets down there. But just, I like how they're stacking up these young, interesting receivers that can fit into this offense. And they're also, let's keep in mind, we just gave Tyler Lockett a huge contract. DK Metcalf's going to get paid next year. You want to keep the rest of that receiver room pretty cheap. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be chasing those Jaron Brown types, those $3 million kind of journeyman veterans to fill out your wide receiver room. So I like that they're kind of stacking that spot and getting some competition there.
Yeah. And that's a fantastic point. And the thing is, like, you're right. I didn't even think about the Super Bowl, the Senior Bowl, where he was
Super Bowl.
No, in the Senior Bowl when he was turned, he was. Yeah. And who didn't have fantastic physical attributes was Doug Baldwin. Mm-hmm. But you know what Doug Baldwin had? He was probably the best in the NFL at beating the press and getting open right at the line of scrimmage.
His body control.
Oh my God, he was freaking amazing. Just watching him against press coverage was like, it was football porn. I mean, he was just so good at what he did. But he wasn't, go look at his combine numbers and that kind of stuff. Nothing jumps off the table as being great.
Yep.
But he was a fantastic player. And so if he's turning guys around, if he's making guys struggle, to figure out what he's doing and when he's doing it. Sometimes physical traits aren't everything. I mean, Steve Largent did not have great physical traits. People talked about he was too slow. I mean, he was a 6th round pick. He was too slow and all of this other stuff. And he's one of the best wide receivers of all time. And so give the guy a chance. There is a lot to like, and you're right. He was very productive.
Yeah. I think, Largent had 100 touchdowns in his career here. And,
he was the first one to 100.
Doug Baldwin had almost the same amount, not quite the same amount of time, but, about 47 touchdowns or something like that. Was still quite, productive. But man, Largent's going to be hard to touch. He's still at the top there in the franchise and close to the top in the league. So
right now, watching Metcalf, Largent's going to see some records in Seattle fall. Maybe not the.
We've been waiting a while for that to say that out loud.
Maybe not the consecutive catches or consecutive games of the catch or that kind of stuff, because
208 or something like that.
Because that was insane for Largent, but touchdowns and yards and receptions.
Well, what's going to be fun is Lockett's going to break a bunch of those first,
and then Metcalf's going to be right behind him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when they give Lockett that contract, he's going to be around for a while in order to be able to at least get in the conversation. So Dan, let me ask you this. Are there a couple other players that you really like, undrafted guys that Seattle brought in? And if so, why?
So the rest of the list is kind of uninspiring. I was looking at some top end guys. I really thought they'd take a shot at Marvin Wilson or Darius Stills, try to get another interior defensive lineman that was interesting. Wilson ended up signing, I think, the biggest contract of all the undrafted guys to go to Cleveland. So there was quite a competition there for his services. And there were a couple of corners I'd hoped that they would sign. They did sign Brian Mills, who's really struggled with some technique issues.
Keith mentioned him last week's mock draft. He thought that might be the corner I had in my mock for my last pick.
He fits more of the bigger specs, and he'll be a really interesting developmental guy. There are a couple of interesting offensive linemen they added, so they still just added a bunch of competition to that group.
I thought it was an interesting offensive line group that they brought in, because when you look at the physical attributes and what they're kind of schemed towards, it looked more like what we've been used to in the past within the power zone schemes and so forth.
Yeah, like Jared Hawker. I mean, he had a draftable grade from a lot of people. He was kind of rated as a 6th rounder and didn't get picked, but he's more of doesn't really seem to fit the outside zone. Big, strong guy that maybe would be more in a power scheme. But he also took some reps too at center. I saw an interview with him where he said he's been working on the ability to play center as well. So he could be in the mix, that's not my favorite center guy. Okay.
I know. And he's got the greatest name too. So I'm interested to see how you pronounce this.
Pierre-Olivier Lestage.
Oh yes. The greatest name in football.
I hope that's how it's pronounced, because it just sounds.
Actually, awesome. I'm pretty sure that is how it's pronounced. That is very well done.
Yeah.
Well, I am. Viens is French, so.
Well, there you go. So so this guy is interesting because I agree with you. He's kind of one of those guys that's completely under the radar. Like nobody's prospected this guy at all.
Right.
But I could not find him on a prospect list.
No. Well, I had to go to the Montreal Times to even read about the guy, right?
He was invited to the Shrine Bowl, but they didn't play the Shrine Bowl. So it was just all virtual, and they had some meetings and talked about some scheme stuff or whatever. Tape's hard to find on him, but there was this one kind of blurry, almost looked like someone shot it on an old Super 8 from the end zone, where he was playing guard and he was just killing guys. I mean, he was 20 yards downfield looking for someone else to hit. 6'3", 312, whatever he is. He's big. He can really run. He can really move. He's a beast, and he's got that mentality. And the thing is that he's been training for the last year to play center with an E on it, by the way. When you read the articles about it,
centre.
He's been training to play centre. And he's been training, just not knowing where he's going. He's been training to snap with both hands.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting.
He's been training with Paul Alexander, the Cincinnati Bengals offensive line coach from 94 to 2017.
One of the great offensive line coaches out there. And he was a guy from my understanding that, from what I've been able to get my hands on, that he was in demand. There were a lot of teams looking at him. Well, he himself said, but the Seahawks were the most aggressive, and he thought there was an opportunity there.
He had multiple offers on the table. There were 10 teams involved. Yeah. And he said it came down to the overall vibe that he had with the Seahawks, and he felt like he'd have a good opportunity to go to Seattle and compete right away.
And he was one of the first names announced. So they were on him.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting when. Oh, sorry. It's interesting.
I'm very interested to see him get on the field in camp at practice, so they can see a little better of what they've got. But the fact that a lot of guys or a lot of teams were after him, even though playing in Canada and all of that, there are teams that really liked what he can do, and we'll see. Like I said, right now it's hard to find any information on him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's got a great work ethic. His college coach came up and spoke highly of him, all that kind of stuff. And he's confident.
And he has to account for 12 men when he's blocking up there.
That's funny. Yeah,
it's going to be easier for him down here.
So Keith, they also signed a couple of running backs, and I'm just kind of curious if you made note of those guys, the BJ Edmonds.
And Josh Johnson.
I watched some Josh Johnson film, and the guy looks like Chris Carson in a sense, slightly shorter, but he's kind of just
his 2019 tape is really. He had a really great year in 2019.
And the NFL comp to him was.
I thought he was
DJ
draftable.
Dallas, which is weird.
That
Josh
is weird.
Johnson, you thought?
Yeah, I thought Josh Johnson was draftable, and he didn't get drafted, so we'll see. But yeah, I mean, he's a guy that I thought could be drafted by a team in the 6th or 7th round, come in, earn a spot. He's going to have a hard time earning a spot in Seattle because the running back room, the top 2 spots are full, and so now he's competing with DJ Dallas and Homer and who's the other guy? Bill
Alex Collins.
There we go.
Yeah.
Trying to find a spot. So it's going to be a hard room to crack there for them. But I felt this was a draftable player that don't know why he fell through the cracks.
So speaking of the running back room, just a passing thought. The team didn't, to anybody's surprise, did not extend Rashad Penny for his 5th-year option that would have paid him, unreasonable amount of money for the production that he's put on the field. So I like it. I mean, Josh Johnson is a great pick. It totally fits what Seattle's trying to do as far as being able to run through the tackles and so forth. But I'm not sure about the stretch zone stuff. And then the other guy, I don't really know too much about. I'll be completely honest. The Edmonds pick. But again, he's one of those guys that's 6 foot, 220 pounds. It doesn't seem like he would be the type that would run around the end, or we would probably know about him if he could, at that size. Anybody else that stands out? I know that you mentioned defensive tackle. They did pick one up in the Jared Hewitt, defensive tackle out of Virginia Tech, 6'2", 290, runs a 5'02", 40. He's more of a 3-tech kind of an option for them. Not a run stuffer, but a guy that's going to be able to penetrate the pocket a little bit. So,
it'll be interesting to look at. I haven't looked into him at all, but I find it interesting, the Army kid that they signed, John Radigan, because they didn't draft a linebacker, and he's the only linebacker they signed. And there's only 5 on the roster right now. So, although I think that'll change pretty soon, but that's interesting to me. And then Conor Weddington, I find a hard time kind of seeing how he might have a path to the roster. The kid out of Stanford from Sumner, he's 6 foot. He's a 6 foot possession receiver, great hands, as you would expect. A guy out of Stanford, made some incredible behind him and poorly thrown balls he would catch, but he's 6 foot even, doesn't have great speed, doesn't have,
I think, but
doesn't have great
like
size.
4.55, is he? What, something like that?
I think this is but they gave him like a $20,000 signing bonus, which is pretty big for undrafted free agency.
It's huge for an undrafted because they're limited each year. You're only given, I think this year it was $60,000 that you could give out to players. Yeah. And they gave a third of their allotment in terms of signing bonuses to one guy.
And I have a hunch, we know how they love special teams guys. They lost some guys off their roster this year that were great on the kick teams. And I have to think that maybe that's the primary reason they brought him in and gave him that kind of money. But yet again, just another guy in that receiver room.
So before I'm going to touch base a little bit on the NFC West, but before we do that, is there anything that stands out on the roster right now, the way that's constructed, where you still see legit holes, or is everything lining up pretty well after the draft?
I still think they need a cornerback.
What do you think that they think?
Here's my thought on corner. And I think the reason that I actually thought leading up to the draft, we might not see them draft one. Again, limited mini camps this year, everything virtual, limited ability to get your hands on players. I think the reason they brought Pierre Desir back, they brought Akilla Witherspoon back, or over from the Niners. They brought Demarius Randall back. These are all guys who know the step kick, who know the technique, who know the scheme, and the learning curve is not going to be very high.
And they're going to have a good front end.
Yeah, and they haven't had very good luck with bringing veterans in from other systems either. So I don't know if we're going to talk about adding a corner, then the Richard Sherman discussion has to be talked about. I have some feelings on that. I think right now the biggest hole on the roster is there's only those 5 linebackers, and
yep.
I think it's only a matter of time before KJ comes back and is added to that roster.
That seems more likely than Richard Sherman.
The other KJ coming back, because he's not going to sit out there for too long.
No,
unsigned. He'll eventually come in and take what the
Seahawks
are
so
offering.
What does his contract look like on a 1-year deal, and if they do a 2-year type thing?
It'll be 1 year, 2.5.
Oh, I was gonna say 3
painful.
Tops.
That's so painful for
it's
him.
crazy, but that's the market. And I think Wednesday watching that press conference you referenced, Schneider's comments about him. Mm-hmm. It basically sounded to me like if you could interpret him, he basically said, we didn't plan on bringing him back because we thought someone would pay him.
Yes,
and
that's exactly right. We thought he'd be signed by now. Quote
yeah. Yeah. And even Carroll's comments were, well, I've checked in with him and, we know where we're at and we know where he's at and he knows where we're at. And then the Cowboys, maybe one of the only other teams that were really interested in him, go and sign 2 or draft 2 rangy, long, big outside linebackers. So they're out of it. He has no
think
market.
Seattle would bring him back on just a face-saving move for KJ, right? Just from the loyalty standpoint.
I think he's coming off a great year after the position switch, and I think they would see him as being a productive player.
Yeah. The other player that fits into this mix once he can pass the physical is Bruce Irvin, and he probably won't sign until
training camp,
early August. But
God, that's a good point. He sent out that cryptic tweet a couple months ago. I kind of felt like he was going to step away, but man, that'd be interesting.
So you mentioned the cornerbacks, Keith, and let me just run these through. Go ahead.
I would say getting Pierre Desir in. He knows the system. I mean, he had a great year after leaving Seattle, and his play has fallen off the last couple of years. He hasn't been as good. Sure. But that first year when he left, he was clearly the best defensive back on that Colts roster. Got a big contract, and then his play's fallen off. But I think he gave them that was a draft hedge. They didn't have to go get a starter because they knew they've got with him and Witherspoon and Reed and Flowers. They think they could get it done, and then they add in their draft pick. I just don't see all of those guys being there on the roster when it's all said and done. Someone else is going to have to come along. It can be Richard Sherman. I don't think it will be. I don't see that happening. But it could be, other guys that get cut. It could be someone that they bring in last second. But I don't see that group, since that's the only thing in that group. That's the only thing in that room. You're expecting all 5 of those guys to pan out, and I just don't see all of them doing so. So I think they're going to get one more.
I'll tell you another thing that I think we're still going to see, even maybe irregardless of what ultimately happens with Aldon Smith's situation, is Pete said Wednesday in that pre-draft presser that he really likes where their pass rush is, but we're not done adding there yet. And then they didn't add anything in the draft or an undrafted free agency. There's still a couple interesting veterans out there, guys like Melvin Ingram and Ryan Kerrigan and Justin Houston.
Do you think they wait for the Aldon Smith thing to wash out?
I think they do, and I think they can. I would think that we'd hear something soon. You know, if there's video evidence and Smith says he never touched the guy, I would think as soon as that's kind of figured out, or somebody, you know, at a certain level in law enforcement sees that, if that's true, or the other way, and it proves the suspected victim's case, then, you know, and I think they have the luxury of being able to wait that one out. Yeah.
Yeah. Even on the Seahawks roster, they only have 4 linebackers listed: Cody Barton, Jordan Brooks, Ben Burkerman, and Bobby Wagner.
It'll be interesting to see if ultimately, I mean, I think Pete was pretty clear the other day that they see Darrell Taylor playing some linebacker.
Yes.
Yeah,
he's
at the same
listed as defensive end.
Yeah, I think that's in the plans, and so, you know, the roster may just look different this year as far as positional.
So he's a 200. You know, out of college, he was 262 or 57 or 59, something.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, that's a little big to play strong side, but you know, what are you going to do? But
well, I think it's talking. I don't think he'd be a full-time guy. I think more kind of the Bruce Irvin mold, right? Sort of in those bare fronts, he'd be the 5th guy. And
you know that Jamal Adams is going to take some snaps there. It's just kind of where they align, you know, in name only kind of thing.
This is a team that you're going to see in a lot of nickel, because they want to get Blair on the field, and they want to get.
I was just gonna talk about that, Keith. It's like we were talking about defensive linemen, the Ugo Amadi and Blair. You've got that slot kind of man, but they probably want Blair to move around a little bit, I would imagine. And then now you've got Trey Brown, Desir, Quandre Diggs is lining still up at free safety. I don't think we have a really good free safety option on the roster except for Marquise Blair, but they've got him listed at strong safety still, not slot.
We also have Ryan Neal.
They can play strong safety as well, but they don't have. There's really not a lot of free safety talent on the roster, which I thought is kind of interesting.
Ugo Amadi.
That's what I was going to say, especially with Trey Brown's addition. Ultimately, maybe he ends up being a slot, and Ugo can play more free safety. It's interesting what they've done with this defensive roster, because what was the book on Carroll's defense the first 6-7 years, and especially in those Super Bowl years? It was that they don't do anything exotic. They just line up against you and they play their base defense, and they try to play with good technique and make you beat them. Now it seems like what the light that went on last year, halfway through the season, was they started being a little more unpredictable. They started faking blitzes more. They started being a little bit less easy to read. And now you wonder the way they're putting this roster together, all these guys with versatility that can play different positions. I hope it means that week in and week out, depending on who the opponent is, we're going to see kind of some mix and match scheme changes and guys that can play a little bit of everything, because they've certainly changed the defensive roster in that way, with a whole bunch of guys that can do a whole bunch of things.
Yeah. And I like that. I think that we did see a lot of that last year, and that's how we ended up with a strong safety that set an NFL record for sacks as a safety, despite missing a bunch of games because of injury. And so, you know, they were doing a bunch of stuff, and they weren't running cover 3 on every play. They were running cover 2 a lot, and they were switching up their zones, and it was never the same thing 2 plays in a row. And I thought it was different. It confused some quarterbacks down the stretch. And it really got a lot out of the talent that they had. And you saw the difference it made. I mean, a lot of it was getting guys healthy and getting guys there, and then the trade that happened. But the first half of the season, they were an historically bad defense. They were on pace to have the record completely blown out against them for yards given up passing. Yeah. And in the second half of the season, they were one of the best defenses in the NFL. And some of that was the quarterbacks that they played, so let's remember that. But they were legit. And there was a philosophical change. They got a bunch of guys back. And there's a lot of different factors to it. But being able to be versatile in that defense was part of it.
Do you expect them to pick up right where they left off? Or do you think there's going to be some sort of scheme change again or adjustments? Or now that you've got Blair back and you've got Hyder in there, you're getting Taylor back. We don't know if Wright's coming back. Is there a difference in talent level? Or do you think the back end still kind of iffy, and that really is the story is yet to be written on that?
I think the front end talent, with the exception of they need a pass rusher in the middle, and we don't know who that's going to be. And that I think when Pete Carroll was saying that they're going to add to the pass rush, I think it's someone in the middle, not an edge guy.
But Geno Atkins is still out there, right?
That's kind of who I was thinking of. Him. A guy that can get after the passer from the 3-tech spot. That when especially if they add that the front end, the pass rush is going to be great. The corners don't have to be as good. Yeah. They've only got to cover for 3 sequence.
So how do you think that we did compared to the other NFC West teams? I was just going to run through those really quick and just kind of get a quick word before we end. So Arizona's draft, they got Zaven Collins, linebacker Rondell Moore, Marco Wilson. The rest of their draft is the Rams got Tutu Atwell to kind of be their slot guy. Ernest Jones, linebacker, physical guy. Bobby Brown, I think a little underrated, kind of a 3-tech kind of a guy. Robert Rochelle, one of the corners that we thought maybe would be on the periphery for them. And then of the 49ers, I thought really did a nice job. Trey Lance, obviously they traded from 12 to 3, got their quarterback. Keith, you really like Trey Lance.
I'm really high on Lance. What it sounds like when they made that trade, they went up to get Zach Brooks. And then in the week since then, Trey Lance changed their mind. With his workouts and everything, and they went back and rewatched stuff and they realized Zach Brooks was a guy with a pretty he's got a high.
What's his last name? The quarterback?
Mac Jones.
Jones. Why am I saying Jones?
Mac Jones.
Mac Jones. So Jones he's a guy that has a really high floor, but not the highest ceiling. I mean, he just doesn't. He's
right. Well, we all thought that was kind of weird.
Yeah. But everyone thought, okay, but that's what Schottenheimer likes. He's not Schottenheimer, Shanahan likes. I am just on a roll today. But he likes the guys that are super accurate and are good at processing whatever's in front of them. They don't have to be athletic and all those things.
Yeah.
And so they're like, oh yeah, sure, that'll work. But his ceiling is not that high. And so moving up to get him, it just didn't make a lot of sense. And I think that eventually they talked to themselves into the right pick, which is get the guy with an insanely high ceiling, a guy that can, he needs time.
Yeah, I think he might struggle the first go around. We'll see.
He needs development. But you know what? They still have Jimmy Garoppolo on the roster. So he's going to have a year. He's going to get some playing time anyways because Garoppolo can never stay healthy. But he's going to get a chance to develop in this year. But he has really, really high ceiling.
No, I think it sets him up very well. And they also picked up Aaron Banks, a guard that we all thought was really well, a good physical guard. Trace Sermon, I thought was a great pick for them at running back. Ambre Thomas.
Yeah, that was a perfect. That might have been their best pick.
I like
Jaylon Moore, the offensive guard, Keith, that you liked. They picked up one of the safeties from USC, and then their last pick, Elijah Mitchell, had a really nice pro day. Dropped some weight from his regular season weight and showed that he could be a dynamic guy in the back end of the draft there. I thought that was a great value. So I liked their draft. I mean, I really did, just from a kind of a non-biased opinion. But
stupid
what do you
49ers had to have a good draft.
Well, you combine that.
Well, now let me say this
with the re-signing of Trent Williams and getting Bosa back and coming off that shitty year last year. Are they the team to beat now in the division? Coming back from a really bad injury-stricken season, elevate themselves back to the top.
Who do they sent their 2 starting cornerbacks into free agency and haven't replaced them. There are still problems on the offensive line. There are still problems, the depth on the defensive line. I don't think they are. I think and they still have Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback, which drops the ceiling for that team down significantly. The team to beat is the Rams. To me, they're the strongest team. And, the trade they made, they got themselves a quarterback, and they've been able to fill in around. I thought they were really going to struggle to keep that roster together with all of the cap hit that they took in that trade. But, they were able to get a lot of pieces to re-sign. It's a short window for them.
You got to love this division. I mean, just as a fan, this tough. Division is legit. I mean, it really is.
A lot of national
team
TV
has really, really competent general managers that are doing a good job with long-term vision and bringing in good quality talent. I mean, every team has a shot. I mean, Arizona, you might say, just from an inexperienced standpoint and a coaching standpoint, they might be the bottom dwellers, but barely. I mean, they've got a great quarterback. They just need to surround them with good quality players and an offensive line. They've got a good, solid defense. I think that team they put themselves in a conversation anyway. They had a great offseason, I thought.
Kyler Murray keeps them in the conversation no matter what. It's just like Russell Wilson. No. There were times in the past few years where Seattle had a talent deficit, but Russell Wilson kept them in the playoffs. Kyler Murray. Seattle
still has a talent deficit right now in the division, or do you think they really made up for it this year?
I think they're in good shape. I think they're in really good shape. And I think people aren't going to give them a lot of credit for where they're at, but I think they're in really good shape. I think that Arizona, you got Kyler Murray is great. To me, it's going to come down to, until they get a coach in there that knows what he's doing, they're just never going to live up to the talent. They're never going to live up to the potential that they have. They really have got to get rid of Kingsbury and get a guy that knows how to coach and knows how to get the most out of his team.
Or he's got to surround himself with good quality position coaches or, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator guy.
Yep. Once they do that, that team's going to be rough. They're going to be hard to deal with. But with Kingsbury in there, I'm not as concerned.
Yeah, I agree with Keith on. I do think the Rams are the team to beat. I think they had that all-in kind of go-for-it offseason, going out and getting Stafford. But the pressure's on them. They're going to be everybody's pick, and all eyes are going to be on them.
A lot of coaches, though, too. And that
they did, and they don't have the depth that they did a couple of years ago. This is what happens when you're paying a bunch of elite guys elite money. And I didn't like their draft really at all. I don't think it added anything that we need to be concerned with.
No.
And San Francisco, I think, has well, let me just say this. And we talked about this a month ago. 3 months ago, I think we were all scared of what the Seahawks team was going to look like in 2021.
Absolutely. Could have gone a lot of different directions.
Given the lack of resources financially and draft pick wise, I think what John Schneider was able to do this offseason was remarkable. And I think he's gotten their roster to a point that now when you look at him against San Francisco with Bosa and all their guys coming back, the difference is the quarterback. And I still think the Seahawks have the second best roster in the division as we stand here today. And then I'll say this about Trey Lance. Does he have the highest ceiling of those guys that were available? Absolutely. Does he have traits? Absolutely. He's thrown less than 400 passes in college football. He's played one game in the last 18 months. And he played let's not just talk about level of competition, but let's talk about the team he played for at that level of competition. He played for the New England Patriots of that level. He played for a team that was loaded with guys that are on NFL rosters today against teams that weren't. And I see the traits on tape. I do. But we saw those same traits out of Carson Wentz at that level too.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah. And Carson Wentz had a near MVP type year before relationship with the coach broke down. His mechanics went to crap and everything. I mean, he did have a fantastic year a couple of years ago.
He did. So, and I'm not saying that Lance won't. All the things you hear about him, his head for the game and his football mind are all things that give him an edge over a lot of these other prospects that we drool over every year. I just think that as high as his ceiling is, he also probably of all those guys has the highest margin for error.
Yeah. He's got the lowest floor of the 5 elite quarterbacks, but he's got the second highest.
It's not
ceiling.
A sure thing. And Kyle Shanahan and his father, Mike, both don't have a great history of selecting and grooming quarterbacks. And so we'll see. I think as a Seahawks fan, though, I would have been a little more nervous if they had taken Justin Fields, for example, because I think he would have played as a rookie. I think we're looking forward to another season of primarily Jimmy Garoppolo if he can stay healthy. And again, I think that works against the 49ers in big games. So we'll see. It's going to be – I can't wait for that schedule to come out in 2 weeks because I think the NFC West is going to be all over the national TV game schedule.
It should be. It's
and look at our home schedule potentially.
Yeah.
We get Kyler Murray, of course, Matt Stafford. That's cool. We could see Trey Lance at home. We could see Justin Fields as the starting quarterback of the Bears, Trevor Lawrence as the starting quarterback of the Jags, and then Tannehill, and we get to see Matt Stafford or Jared Goff again, and then I guess Ian Book for the New Orleans Saints. I guess.
Yeah, that was an interesting pick early.
I'm joking.
Yeah,
that was a weird. Yeah, it's what were the biggest surprises? What were some of the biggest reaches you guys saw?
Well, I think the Ian Book one is interesting because I thought he had a fantastic Senior Bowl. He looked like a very competent, but he's so physically limited as a player. But mentally, I really like him. So it'll be interesting to see if he ever gets out of the second tier backup quarterback type thing. I don't think he will.
Who is the Stanford quarterback who went
Davis Mills?
Davis Mills.
Yeah.
He's going in. Look at the situation he's going in. He gets to go in behind and sit behind Tom Brady for a year, and just learn.
Oh, you're talking about Kyle Trask.
Oh no, yeah, you're right.
Mills went to the Texans. I thought you were going to talk about how terrible his situation.
Yeah, no, I was thinking. I actually, and I wanted to, but I was thinking about the two of them together. But no, it's Kyle Trask gets to go sit behind Tom Brady for a year. That team is absolutely loaded, everywhere on the roster, and he's just going to sit there. He's going to learn. He's going to be in the film room with one of the best ever in the film room. Just learning like crazy, and then he's probably going to be handed the keys to the franchise a year from now.
And he can't move, but he doesn't have to behind that offensive line. I mean, he can sling it.
And then you look at the other end with Mills going to the Texans, and this is a guy who is not going to be ready to start. But if things go poorly for all the legal stuff that's going on there, he may be thrown out there week 1. And he is gonna get clobbered. He is that's of all the situations that he could have gone to, that was one of the worst ones for him.
And then I thought as far as quarterbacks go, I thought Kellen Mond landed in a pretty good situation with the Vikings too. With the team that he gets just no pressure to play right away. Pretty good roster, and do
you think the 266 overall was a little early for him, or do you think that was inevitable?
Mond was that guy this year. Yeah, Mond was that guy this year, and Mills had about 5 minutes of this too, where it was like, I'm hearing he might sneak into the bottom of the first round. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it would with this draft and with the drop off after those first 5 quarterbacks to the next ones, teams will talk themselves into quarterbacks if they really need one, and they always need them. So
yeah, 2 of my favorite corners in the draft ended up going a little earlier than I thought, and I thought they may have been in play around pick 100 or so if Seattle could figure out a way to work themselves back into a spot where Paulson Adebo was there, or Benjamin St. Juste was there. Benjamin St. Juste went 74 overall, and Adebo went 76. So about 25-30 picks before I thought that they would go, but I understand why they went.
Who went later than I really expected was Israel Mukuafu, and he went in the 6th round.
Yeah, right. And we picked our guy before him. I thought that he would have a real opportunity with the Seahawks because he actually does everything that Seattle likes really well.
He's 6'3", he's long, and he's super athletic. He's a guy that I am really surprised that Seahawks went with a 5'9" guy with short arms over a guy like that, and he went a round and a half later. It's crazy. It's crazy to me that he went so late.
Check this out, Keith. So in our mock draft, the corner. So we mentioned Mills, the corner that we picked up, an undrafted free agent, and you kind of said, "Is that the guy that you're thinking about in the 7th round?" And I said, "No, it's Nahshon Wright from Oregon State." He went 99 overall to the Dallas Cowboys. I'll have you know, the kid from Oregon State.
You were on it.
Wow,
crazy!
I didn't see him going that early at all.
I figured he'd be at all.
I figured he'd be 6th, 7th round, but 99th overall.
And Elijah Molden, believe it or not, a superior player in every possible way, went after he did at 100 overall. So I thought, he would go a lot earlier. Quinn Miners ended up going 98. I thought he would end up. I thought his rise was pretty substantial. But I thought that just given all of the press and all that he would end up going in the 70s or 80s, and he ended up going a little later. Probably right about where he should have been.
He was a guy that if the Seahawks were able to trade back a couple of times and pick up maybe a couple 4th round picks, that Miners was the guy that I was kind of hoping that they'd zero in on to be that center of the future, because athletically and everything, he just has everything that you'd want. He just needs time. He needs coaching, but they've got Posick, who can come in and play this year. Posick's probably going to get hurt at some point and miss some time, and so Miners would get a chance to get some reps and that in games, and it would be good for his development. A year from now, we'd have a starting center. But it just didn't fall that way for them.
I think one of the most fascinating things to see as we get into camp is going to be that secondary and watching those corners and that battle. And they usually sign 2 or 3 of those guys in undrafted free agency. But I wonder, especially given, the learning curve and the lack of learning curve we talked about earlier, this is the time of year that I always like to reacquaint myself with the practice squad and the futures guys and some of those guys that were sort of under the radar. They were really high on Gavin Heslop, who they took out of they signed out of Stony Brook last year as an undrafted guy. They added Jordan Miller at the end of the season and signed him to a futures deal. The kid out of UW, everyone from here knows, and he was a 5th round pick of the Falcons, played for Dan Quinn for 2 years. He's in that mold, 6'2" and 207. And even Jason Stanley is still only 24 years old, and they like him, and he's 6'2". So you wonder, there's always those guys every year that Pete talks about how much they like him. And then sometimes you never hear from him again. But I wonder if they feel pretty highly about some of those young defensive backs they have that we're not talking about too.
I'm still a little wary of the lack of safeties on this roster. But I agree with you on the corners. I think that the corner group is interesting, and competition wins. And if that's the case, we may have a capable, okay level defensive back group this year. That may end up surprising us, but at the same time, when you look at them on paper, they're underwhelming and they're not going to scare anybody. So
there's a lot more competition there, though. Just 2 years ago, our primary 2 deep at the corner position was Nico Thorpe and Akeem King. That was it. I mean, you have to admit there's a lot more depth of talent there now to choose from, and hopefully some of those guys will, earn their keep.
Who are you most excited to see in 2021 up and down the entire roster?
Oof.
Keith, what do you got, Keith?
Up and down the entire.
Do you think DK Metcalf has another level? Like
he does.
You remember last year we talked about this, kind of leading into the season. We said, okay, who's going to make the jump? And we all said, well, DK's got to make a jump because. And we, the first season, we walked around a little bit gingerly because we didn't want to give him too much of a ceiling and keep
the expectations low for him. He's a rookie. Rookies always underproduce what people think they should because it takes time to develop. And he just, we're like, keep the expectations down. He is that good, but that doesn't mean he's going to produce. And then he just did great. And then last year we were like, okay, we know he's got all pro potential.
Exactly.
Is he going to get there? And for most of the season, he did.
He did, right.
I think he does have another level because
I thought so too.
Oh my gosh,
because we still saw him. I mean, when he gets to a point where he's winning those battles against elite corners, when we can play the Rams and he doesn't get shut out and he can start winning some of those battles, I think that's his next level.
Yep. And I think
the other thing a couple of more contested catches.
He's got to cut down on the drops. He cuts down on the drops. Yeah. I mean, he's got another 15 catches and 150 yards, and that was just last year. So I do think there's another level for him. Mm-hmm. So I think he's going to get there. But honestly, I'm really excited about seeing the offensive line because I'm me and that's what I do. I watch the offensive, but the idea of having Gabe Jackson in there, who's a pass blocking, guy who's really good, and seeing Forsyth in the preseason and at camp, being able to come in and he's a pass blocking guy, and just the overall talent that they've got. They've got good talent. They've got some depth, which is crazy.
He seems to be really high on Cedric Abuahe, Keith, like where he's going to get an opportunity against Shell to be able to compete for a starting spot. Do you think that that's a viable option?
I mean, let him compete. I think Shell's going to win that competition based on what we saw the first half of the year when Shell looked great. And then Shell had that injury. Abuahe came in. Abuahe looked terrible. Then Abuahe
looked competent
and looked good. And then Shell came back, and Shell was not as good as he was early in the season. Yeah. And so, at the end of the year, they were equal.
Well,
they really were.
What do you think about what Pete Carroll said about, I feel bad for Abuahe because because of COVID, we really didn't give some guys a chance to really compete and earn spots. And this year's going to be different.
Well, and I think that he's going to honestly, they're pretty equal as far as talent and production and stuff. You look at, especially the last few games last year, and there should be a competition.
If Brandon Shell doesn't start, does he get cut?
No, because you still need a swing tackle.
And he's still inexpensive.
Yep.
I thought that was interesting. It was almost like he was putting pressure on Shell. He was kind of calling him out, and I even had one of those thoughts when I was listening to him talk about Abuahe, where I was like, I wonder if they offered Shell an extension. He turned it down, and now Carroll's putting the heat on him. Like, you know what I mean? That seemed odd to me, but maybe that was just the one spot that kind of was easy for him to pick out, to talk about his idea that he didn't think he did a good enough job of creating.
Does something like that? It's usually not a diss on Shell. It's usually trying to elevate a guy.
Yeah,
and that to me was a clear elevation of Cedric Abuahe as a guy that he's basically told him, "Listen, I'm going to give you a real chance this year. You better come into camp ready." And that was a challenge more to Abuahe to be ready, as opposed to Shell kind of, you did a bad job, your job's in jeopardy kind of a thing.
Yeah, because it is going to light a fire under Shell. He's gonna hear that and be like,
"Whoa, contract year, yeah,
I'm in a contract year. If I win the starting job, I'm going to get paid next year. If I don't, I may be out of a job next year, and just like not be bouncing around as a backup." So for him, he knows what's at stake. He's going to be working out. He's going to be in the weight room more than he had planned on it, and he's going to come in and be ready. So there's that.
I think the thing I'm most looking forward to, other than just the offense itself, what the offense is going to look like, I want to see what he does with that tight end group. With bringing Gerald Everett in and how unique Colby Parkinson can be. And
we didn't get a chance at all to see what he can do.
And a whole another year of workouts and rehab and getting healthy for Disley too.
For Disley, who kind of seemed like he was really stuck in the corner last year after, we saw the potential, the beginnings of his first 2 years. There's so much to work with there. And I think we've wanted our coordinators here forever to use their tight ends more, because Seahawks have always had a good tight end room. But I think Everett in particular is such a dynamic talent, and Parkinson is so unique. And then Disley is kind of your two-way do-it-all guy.
Dan, I'm telling you that the offense has the potential to be the most dynamic and explosive offense I think the Seahawks have ever had. If you really look at it.
That's saying a lot, because with the Mike Holmgren, Matt Hasselbeck is like 2005. That offense
was tremendous. I mean,
that offense
had
just
ran 1,600 yards
teams.
and 25 or 28 touchdowns or something like that. That was crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that offense was not stopped.
And Darrell Jackson, if he didn't have all the drops, he'd still be playing in Seattle, because that guy could play. I mean, he was one of the most underrated wide receivers in the NFL, but the drops there killed him.
Well, yeah, and then he hurt his knee, and then he went to San Francisco and couldn't really even produce, because once he lost his knee, he was done.
I was kidding,
but yeah, I mean, does this have the potential to be more dynamic and more explosive and everything? Yeah, actually it does.
Well, you had Jeremy Stevens at tight end. You had, a couple all pros, Hall of Fame left side of the offensive line, Robbie Tobeck at center. Was it Edwin Bailey, I think, at right guard, maybe?
On that team, it was it was the kid that went to Atlanta after that. I'll think about it, because I'm thinking of the Beastquake run. Because it was McQuiston was on that offensive line.
Funny. Yeah.
And then
that offense was underrated. I mean, Hasselbeck, you always thought of as being kind of a placeholder kind of guy, a guy that's just going to run an offense and stuff. But, he was at that year, he was probably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL.
He had a 3-year run, 2005, 2006, and 2007, where he was an elite quarterback. And then he hurt his back. And when he hurt his back, he lost a lot. And one of the things that he lost was his quick release, because he had, from the time the ball would start moving until it's out of his hands, he had one of the quickest releases in the NFL when he was at the top of his game. So when a guy came open, it was out of his hand and to him, because he didn't have the greatest arm, but he could still get the ball to him quickly because of that quick release. Once he hurt his back, his release really slowed down, and that's when he started to really struggle. He was still a veteran. He still knew his stuff. He still was good, but he could no longer do anything at an elite level. And that was kind of the end of it for him. But he had a 3-year run where he was an elite player.
So are you guys excited to see? Now I'm going to end it here, because it's we went just as long as we thought we would. Dan.
That's what happens. I mean, the three of us get together. The three of us get together, and we know it's gonna.
And by the way, listeners, we're going to try to get together this summer for a live show all together, and we'll try to break the all-time record.
That'll be that'll be a marathon.
Fantastic.
That'll be a marathon. We'll actually take donations on the air. We'll auction things off.
We'll call it, what do you call it? A telethon or whatever? Yeah, we'll raise money for charity.
Hawkathon or something like that. Yeah.
So how about
more
Jamal
like a
Adams?
talkathon?
Does Jamal Adams come back in a contract year where he could end up being franchise tag next year, in a year he really wants to get an extension, to get paid, to get, prove that he's worth what he wants to be worth? Does he come in mentally in the right space and really be a difference maker again this year in the defense? And how do they integrate him with the new guys?
I hope he does. I think he will. I think especially almost coming off the injury works to the team's advantage. I think he's aware of the perception of him out there, that he's not a guy that would work in every scheme and on every roster. And if the Seahawks aren't going to pay him, he's going to get paid somewhere else. First of all, I think that extension will get done before the first game. But so I think it's a moot point. But
do you think that he's susceptible to injury? Down, the way that he plays?
Potentially, especially that shoulder injury was so fluky. He barely got clipped. But I think the Seahawks have built a roster too, where he's not going to have to blitz 40% of the time like he did last year. And maybe they can protect him that way a little bit too, and not have him up on the line of scrimmage.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing for the defense, considering his coverage skills?
The deficiencies.
We'll see what they do.
The deficiencies in his coverage skills are overblown.
And I think it's a ball skill issue. It's not a coverage issue. He's there. There were so many plays last year that he should have made.
Maybe it's including because a pick he was spread over, so many responsibilities in the defense.
Yeah,
that
it could be another year in the system.
Focused a little bit more in one direction, that might help him.
Yeah.
I think that the sum of the parts is, again, compared to 3 months ago. I mean, this roster, I thought we were going to have to patch things together just to be competitive this year.
We could have gone 2 different ways, Dan. worst case scenario, Russell Wilson's off the roster. We traded him for a bunch of picks and we're starting over to here we are today where it looks about as good as it possibly could have looked given the draft capital, given the original money that we had available in free agency. You got to, I mean, hats off to John Schneider for building the roster the way that it was done and handling the situation. I know some people don't agree with the way that Russell Wilson's situation was handled completely. It was done privately, internally. And I thought, in the end, it proved to be the right way to handle that, because handling that publicly probably would have turned out completely different.
Even if you set the Russell Wilson drama aside, heading into this offseason, my biggest fear was status quo is what was going to rule the day. And the Seahawks were just going to do what they always do. And they were going to stick with Brian Schottenheimer out of stubbornness. And they were going to, those comments from Pete that they were going to run the ball more. And because of the lack of draft capital and salary cap space, they were just going to sign a couple bargain basement guys and try to move forward with what they had. But the fact that they were so creative and they broke some of their own rules and how they structure contracts and even brought in a guy like Waldron, who kind of goes against Carroll's history and what he's looked for in an offensive coordinator. That's what encourages me. And I think the end result is this is a roster now. Of course, there's questions left. There's only one roster I can think of in the NFL that really doesn't have any question marks, and they're the ones that are holding the Lombardi Trophy from last year. But it's a team that if things go right and they stay healthy, obviously, and the new scheme works, this is a roster that can compete for a Super Bowl again. And I didn't think I'd be saying that 4 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah. And just to Bill's point, like if it had gone that Russell Wilson was going to be traded, and he was at that point, trade Brown, trade Adams, trade Diggs.
Oh, this would have been a lot different draft.
Unload everyone. Then you have 74 picks and you just reload the team. And you work towards becoming competitive in a couple years. But the fact that they didn't have to do that, they didn't have to do it, go in that direction. Instead, they retooled a roster despite not having the resources to do so. And they did it in a way that this is a competitive team. And especially if, with Drew Brees gone in New Orleans, and with what's going on in Green Bay, there just isn't, like, the NFC is going to be Tampa.
It's Tampa and the NFC West.
And the NFC West. That's right. It's Tampa and the NFC West. There just isn't that level of just competition, where it's just a loaded conference. Green Bay might be if they get the Aaron Rodgers things fixed, but if they don't, it really is. It's that you win your division and then worry about Tampa down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think, the Russell Wilson thing is interesting going forward. We'll see what happens, in the next calendar year. But I think roster building wise, I think Seattle added to everything that they needed to add to, maybe save the cornerback spot. We'll see. I think they added there. We're just not convinced yet that it's done or it's enough. But you take a look at the defensive line, you take a look at the offensive line, you take a look at the weapons. They brought back Chris Carson, at the weapons at wide receiver, and Darrell Everett. They secured Chris Carson coming back and made sure that area was handled before the draft. And I just think that they built the roster the right way this season, with the defensive line being the ultimate priority. They had said the year prior in 2019 that it was the priority, and failed to address it to the point where they had to get Carlos Dunlap in a midseason trade. And this year, I think they did it right. They made the correct play on the Carlos Dunlap situation in free agency, turned out. And I just think that overall, they've really done a good job making smart moves, waiting out free agency, for good values. And the Kerry Hyder thing may turn out to be one of my favorite picks, or my favorite free agency moves, just because of the lunch pill kind of attitude that he brings and the type of play and player that he is. And I couldn't be more pleased overall with everything. I would have liked to have seen maybe a couple more trade backs and a little bit of a different philosophy in the draft, but I'm not going to complain, because we got some good players, and we were pretty well handled going into the drafts anyway, as far as needs. So.
Yeah, I'm really glad to see them focus the offseason mostly on the defensive line, the offensive line, And, just because that's where they've been deficient. They were just getting beat up front on both sides of the ball. And so they went out to improve that. And that's something that I think this is a team that needed to do. They needed to address the fact that they were getting beat at the line of scrimmage.
All right. I think that's enough. I'm going to release you guys now. You guys can carry on with your day. Thanks for joining us, Dan. Really appreciate it. Dan, where can we find you? How do we listen to you? All that good stuff.
The Emerald City Sportscast is available on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and Google and all those podcast places.
You've done a great job with that show, by the way.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And also the YouTube channel, Emerald City Sportscast. Subscribe there. I'm pretty much live streaming all the shows now on video and back to having more guests again.
Share your inside information on how to do that really well, because Keith and I think we could do it because we never edit our shows. So we could just definitely do a live show, but I'm technology challenged in private. And
well, when we get together for the Hawkathon,
yes,
we can go over all that stuff.
Yeah. All right.
That'll be a crossover event, by the way.
Yeah. No,
right.
That will be an interesting pairing and an interesting kind of a profit sharing, if there was any profit in this.
There's not.
Yeah, that'll be a great event. I almost booked the flight today. I just didn't clear it with the boss, so I didn't push purchase, but I've got my flights identified, so I'll definitely be there. We're talking about July, so.
Well, it'll be good to see you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm the Seahawks. The show's at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all of the shows. And
and Seahawks Forever for my Twitter.
Seahawks Forever. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we're on YouTube as well. And until next time, and there will be a next time.
Thanks, guys.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.